Sarah and Michael's love story unfolded like a cherished fairy tale, a whirlwind romance that swept them both off their feet. Their courtship was rapid, fueled by an undeniable connection, culminating in a wedding that felt plucked from the pages of a glossy magazine. Every detail, from the delicate lace of Sarah's gown to the soft glow of the candlelight, spoke of perfection. Sarah believed she had found her soulmate, a man whose laughter filled her days with joy and whose gaze promised an eternity of happiness. Michael, with his captivating smile and eyes that held a hint of distant mystery, was everything she had ever dreamed of. He possessed a certain enigmatic charm, a quality that drew Sarah in deeper. He rarely spoke of his past, dismissing her gentle inquiries with a deflective joke or a tender kiss, which Sarah, blinded by affection, simply attributed to his intriguing allure. She trusted him implicitly, her devotion absolute, seeing him not just as her husband, but as her future, the anchor in her vibrant, blossoming life. Their newlywed bliss, however, was tragically short-lived. Barely weeks after exchanging vows, Michael vanished. One morning, Sarah awoke to an empty bed, a silence in the house that screamed of absence. Her initial confusion quickly spiraled into frantic worry. She searched every room, called his phone countless times, her voice growing hoarse with each unanswered ring. Panic clawed at her throat. She contacted every friend, every distant relative Michael had ever mentioned. But their responses were uniformly bewildered. No one had seen him. No one knew where he had gone. It was as if he had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and a gaping hole in Sarah's heart. Days bled into weeks, each one a torment of unanswered questions and gnawing fear. Sarah's once bright eyes now held a haunted, distant look. The police investigation yielded nothing but dead ends, their sympathetic shrugs offering no solace. She replayed every conversation, every shared moment, searching for a sign, a clue she might have missed, but found only the echoes of a love that felt increasingly like a cruel illusion. One desolate afternoon, driven by a desperate need to feel close to him, Sarah wandered into Michael's study, a room he had always kept meticulously organized and surprisingly private. Her fingers traced the spines of his books, a profound sense of loss washing over her. As her hand brushed against the underside of his large antique desk, she felt a slight indentation. Curiosity, a flicker of life amidst her despair, compelled her to investigate. With a gentle push, a small, hidden compartment sprang open. Inside, nestled amongst some old, forgotten papers, lay a single, peculiar object. It was a map, not a commercial print, but seemingly hand-drawn on aged parchment, its edges slightly frayed. The lines and symbols were unfamiliar, cryptic, yet a strange pull emanated from it. Scrawled across the center, in bold, almost aggressive lettering, was a single, chilling word that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Betrayal. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The word betrayal seared itself into Sarah's mind, a branding iron of raw emotion. Her initial despair, a crushing weight that had threatened to consume her, now began to transmute into something far more potent, a cold, unwavering determination. The map, clutched tightly in her trembling hand, was no longer just a cryptic object. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down by a man she thought she knew, a man who had shattered her world. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was now overshadowed by a growing sense of unease, a chilling premonition that the fairy tale she had believed in was merely a meticulously crafted illusion. Michael's disappearance, once a tragedy, now felt like a deliberate act, a calculated vanishing. She would not simply mourn, she would investigate. She would unravel the truth, no matter how painful it might prove to be. Her fingers traced the first marked location on the map, a small, faded X near what looked like a forgotten district on the city's periphery. It was an area she had never known Michael to frequent, a labyrinth of narrow streets and crumbling facades that spoke of forgotten histories. The antique shop, its windows grimy with years of neglect, seemed to slump tiredly against its equally decrepit neighbors. A chipped wooden sign, barely legible, declared it Curio Corner. A faint bell jingled as Sarah pushed open the heavy, creaking door, stepping into an atmosphere thick with dust and the scent of aged paper and forgotten dreams. Behind a counter laden with tarnished silver and chipped porcelain sat an old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and knowing. She regarded Sarah with an unnerving intensity, a silent appraisal that made Sarah feel utterly transparent. "Looking for something special, dearie?" the shop owner rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Sarah, her heart pounding, described Michael, his charming smile, his distinctive laugh. A flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed, crossed the old woman's face. "Ah, him," she murmured, a hint of something unreadable in her tone. "He had a way about him, that one. Always searching for things best left undisturbed." The old woman then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some paths, once chosen, are hard to leave. Be careful what you seek, girl. Some truths are sharper than any blade." She then offered Sarah an ancient, leather-bound book, its cover embossed with a faded symbol Sarah didn't recognize. "He would have liked this one," the owner said, her eyes briefly meeting Sarah's, a veiled warning lingering in their depths. Back in the stale air of her silent home, Sarah opened the book. It was a collection of obscure historical essays, dense and uninviting. Yet, tucked between two brittle pages, she found it. A small, folded piece of paper covered in what appeared to be a series of seemingly random letters and numbers. A coded note. Michael, a man who had never shown an interest in such things, had left her a puzzle. Hours blurred into a haze of frustration and mounting suspicion. Sarah worked tirelessly, her mind racing through every shared memory, every casual remark, searching for a key. Finally, a pattern emerged. A simple substitution cipher she vaguely remembered from a childhood game. As the letters fell into place, a new message solidified, pointing to a specific historical society located across town. The name, the Atherton Archives, resonated with an unfamiliar chill. The revelation hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. Her husband, the man she adored, had not only disappeared, but had left behind a breadcrumb trail of deception. Every loving glance, every tender touch, now felt tainted by a chilling undercurrent of falsehood. The Michael she knew was dissolving, replaced by a shadowy figure she couldn't comprehend. Her growing suspicion was no longer a vague feeling. It was a concrete, terrifying reality. The decoded message, stark and unambiguous, revealed a name Sarah had never heard before. Elias Vance, connected explicitly to Michael's alleged family history. The Atherton Archives, a venerable stone edifice nestled among modern glass towers, exuded an air of hushed reverence for the past. Its towering shelves, laden with centuries of brittle documents and dusty tomes, seemed to hum with forgotten stories. Sarah, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, presented the name Elias Vance to the stern-faced receptionist. After a tense wait, she was directed to a secluded research room, where an elderly archivist, his spectacles perched on his nose, greeted her with a polite, if somewhat weary, smile. As Sarah explained her quest, her voice trembling slightly, the archivist's expression shifted from professional detachment to a flicker of profound recognition. He remembered Michael, not as Michael, but as a younger, more intense man known by a different name entirely. Julian Thorne. The revelation struck Sarah like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Julian Thorne, not Michael. The name echoed in her mind, a discordant note in the symphony of her shattered wedding vows. The archivist, sensing her distress, gently confirmed her worst fears. The records Michael had claimed as his family history, the elaborate lineage he had so persuasively painted, were entirely fabricated. There was no Elias Vance in Julian Thorne's known family tree, no trace of the prosperous, philanthropic ancestors Michael had so casually referenced. Every detail, every anecdote, had been a meticulously constructed lie. Her perfect love story, the bedrock of her existence, crumbled into dust. Anger, hot and stinging, began to replace the cold dread. How could she have been so blind, so utterly deceived? The man she married was a ghost, a carefully crafted illusion. As the archivist continued, his voice soft but resolute, the web of deceit grew even more intricate. He spoke of Julian Thorne's involvement in a series of morally ambiguous schemes years ago, whispered rumors of stolen artifacts, and shadowy dealings that had briefly sullied the archive's pristine reputation. Thorne, he explained, had been extraordinarily charming, charismatic enough to gain access to sensitive collections, only to vanish abruptly when suspicions began to mount. He had been a master manipulator, weaving tales and identities with effortless grace. The archivist, a man of quiet integrity, expressed his genuine sorrow for Sarah's plight, offering her a small, leather-bound ledger he had kept, detailing the specific periods Julian Thorne had accessed certain collections. Inside, Sarah found a hastily scribbled address, a location marked just as ambiguously as the first on her map. It was the second X, leading to a secluded, abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. The archivist warned her to be careful, his eyes reflecting a deep concern for the young woman now caught in the wake of Julian Thorne's machinations. Leaving the hushed halls of the archives, Sarah felt a seismic shift within her. The naive, heartbroken wife was gone, replaced by a woman fueled by a righteous fury. The betrayal was no longer a vague concept. It was a tangible, crushing reality that demanded answers. Her grief had transformed into a burning desire for truth, a relentless pursuit that overshadowed everything else. The love she had felt for Michael, once so pure and encompassing, now felt like a festering wound, poisoned by deceit. The abandoned warehouse stood like a skeletal sentinel against the bruised twilight sky, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring into nothingness. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay and damp concrete. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light, filtering through the grimy panes, illuminating a scene of disarray. Empty crates, discarded tools, and scattered papers littered the vast space. Then, tucked away behind a stack of rotting canvases, Sarah found it. A small, sturdy safe, its door ajar. Inside lay not treasure, but a collection of documents, ledgers, coded messages, and photographs. Among them, a chilling realization blossomed. The photographs depicted Michael, or rather Julian Thorne, with other individuals, some of whom Sarah vaguely recognized from news reports about high-profile art thefts. The ledgers detailed transactions, dates, and locations, all pointing to a vast, intricate network. And then, a final, devastating blow. A detailed schematic of the warehouse itself, with annotations in a familiar hand. Michael was not merely a pawn, he was a key player, and he was not alone in his deception. The betrayal ran deeper, far wider than she had ever dared to imagine. The documents within the safe laid bare a chilling truth, far more expansive and sinister than Sarah had anticipated. Her Michael, or Julian Thorne, was inextricably linked to a ruthless criminal organization, a shadowy network operating with alarming efficiency. The ledgers meticulously detailed their illicit activities, the acquisition, smuggling, and sale of invaluable historical artifacts plundered from ancient sites and private collections across the globe. This was no mere petty theft. It was a vast, sophisticated enterprise, and Thorne, astonishingly, appeared to be a significant cog in its intricate machinery. The photographs, previously a fleeting glance, now became stark evidence, showcasing him alongside individuals whose faces had graced the evening news, notorious for their involvement in cultural heritage crimes. A cold, hard resolve settled over Sarah. The raw grief had solidified into an unyielding determination. She would not merely uncover the truth, she would confront it. Her next target was marked on the betrayer's map, a name scribbled hastily next to a nondescript address. A known associate of the organization, a man named Silas Thorne, no relation to Julian, but a prominent figure in the criminal underworld. The decision was fraught with peril, a leap into the unknown, but Sarah felt an unshakable conviction. She meticulously studied the documents, memorizing faces, names, and transaction codes, arming herself with knowledge. The encounter with Silas Thorne unfolded in a dimly lit, smoky bar, a world away from Sarah's sheltered existence. He was a menacing figure, his eyes sharp and assessing. Sarah, drawing upon a newfound wellspring of courage, approached him with a carefully constructed veneer of desperate concern, presenting herself as a distraught relative of Julian Thorne, seeking information about his sudden disappearance from the network. She played the part of the naive, heartbroken wife with chilling precision, her voice laced with feigned vulnerability, while her mind raced, every nerve taut. Silas, initially wary, was eventually swayed by her apparent distress and the subtle hints of insider knowledge she strategically dropped, gleaned from the warehouse documents. He spoke in veiled terms, revealing fragments of Michael's deeper entanglement. The conversation was a tightrope walk, each word a potential misstep. Sarah learned that Michael, or Julian, was not merely a willing participant, but had been coerced, entangled in a web of obligations and threats that extended to her own safety. His disappearance wasn't an escape, but a strategic move orchestrated by the organization, a temporary withdrawal to avoid a looming threat. He wasn't just a thief, he was a pawn, albeit a highly skilled one, caught in a game far larger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. His charm, his meticulous planning, his knack for disappearing, these were not inherent traits of a loving husband, but honed skills of a man living a dangerous double life. The organization had exploited his unique abilities, his charisma, his knowledge of historical artifacts, even his fabricated identity, to their advantage. Silas, satisfied that Sarah was merely a desperate woman seeking her husband, let slip a crucial piece of information, a detail that made Sarah's heart pound with a terrifying mixture of dread and anticipation. The organization was preparing for a major sale, a high-stakes auction of a particularly rare and valuable artifact, one that Julian Thorne himself had been instrumental in acquiring. The third marked location on the map, previously a vague auction house, now crystallized into a specific high-security venue known for its clandestine dealings. And then, the final, chilling revelation. Michael was expected to make an appearance at this auction, not as a buyer or an orchestrator, but as a crucial, unwilling participant. His role remained ambiguous, but the implication was clear. He would be there, and Sarah knew, with a certainty that vibrated through her bones, that this was her chance. Her chance to confront him, to demand answers, and perhaps to understand the true depth of the betrayal that had shattered her world. But the nature of his appearance, Silas hinted, was not what she might anticipate. The opulent auction house, a facade of legitimate commerce, shimmered under the city lights. Its grand entrance a portal to a world Sarah now knew was steeped in illicit dealings. She moved through the throng of wealthy patrons, a ghost in a designer dress, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Her disguise as a potential buyer was meticulously crafted, every detail from her confident stride to her feigned disinterest in lesser lots, designed to deflect suspicion. The air inside hummed with hushed conversations and the clinking of champagne flutes, a stark contrast to the boiling anxiety within her. This was the stage for the exchange of a critical, stolen artifact, the culmination of Michael's, or rather Julian Thorne's, long and dangerous entanglement. Sarah scanned the faces, her gaze darting through the crowd, searching for the man who had shattered her world. Then she saw him. Michael. Not the charming, impeccably dressed husband she remembered, but a man visibly aged, his shoulders slumped beneath a tailored suit that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. His eyes, once sparkling with life and affection, now held a haunted, distant quality, flickering nervously across the room. He was surrounded by men whose cold, unblinking stares screamed danger, their presence a suffocating shroud around him. He was there, just as Silas had predicted, but he was clearly not in control. A pawn, indeed, but one caught in a vice, his movements stiff, his expressions etched with a desperation Sarah recognized as pure anguish. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. The auctioneer's gavel cracked, punctuating the tension as the prized artifact was unveiled. A jeweled sarcophagus lid, ancient beyond measure, glowing with an otherworldly luminescence. Sarah felt a surge of revulsion, knowing the history of plunder behind its display. As the bidding escalated, frantic and aggressive, Michael's handlers subtly maneuvered him closer to the front, their grip on his arms almost imperceptible to the casual observer, yet chillingly obvious to Sarah. She watched, her breath catching in her throat, as Michael's eyes locked onto a small, almost imperceptible signal from one of his captors. It was then that she understood. He was attempting a double cross. A flicker of defiance, a desperate gamble for freedom, crossed his face. He made a sudden, almost imperceptible move, a subtle shift of his body towards a side exit, his gaze fixed on a distant point. Before he could fully execute his intention, however, one of the men surrounding him reacted with brutal efficiency, a quick, almost invisible movement of his hand, and Michael flinched, a silent gasp escaping his lips. He was caught. The realization hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. They knew. They had anticipated his move. A wave of sick dread washed over her, followed by an immediate, visceral understanding that she could not stand by and watch him be swallowed whole by this monstrous organization. The perfect love might have been a lie, the husband a phantom, but the man before her, trapped and broken, was still the man she had loved, the man who had woven himself into the fabric of her life. Without conscious thought, driven by a primal urge to protect, Sarah acted. She let out a piercing shriek, a sound of manufactured panic, and deliberately stumbled, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor with a deafening clatter. The resultant chaos was instantaneous. Heads snapped towards her. The auctioneer paused mid-sentence, and for a precious few seconds, the suffocating grip on Michael loosened as his captor's attention momentarily fractured. "My God, I'm so sorry," she cried, her voice trembling with a mixture of feigned embarrassment and genuine adrenaline. In that fleeting window of opportunity, Michael, his eyes now blazing with a renewed, desperate fire, shoved his closest guard and bolted. The sudden movement galvanized the organization's enforcers, who immediately gave chase, their faces contorted with fury. Sarah, abandoning all pretense, found herself caught in the swirling vortex of panic and pursuit. She saw Michael glance back, his eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second, a silent plea, a desperate hope. She didn't hesitate. Weaving through the scattering crowd, she followed him, the sounds of shouting and crashing echoing behind them. A desperate chase ensued through the opulent halls, past priceless antiquities and stunned patrons. Michael, surprisingly agile despite his earlier demeanor, led the way, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with an intimate knowledge of the building. Sarah, fueled by a terrifying mix of fear and an almost reckless determination, kept pace, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. They burst out into a service alley, the cold night air a shock after the heated interior. The enforcers were hot on their heels, their heavy footsteps pounding ominously behind them. They were cornered, a dead end. Michael turned to face her, his chest heaving, his face pale and streaked with sweat. His eyes, no longer haunted but filled with a profound, bone-deep weariness, locked onto hers. "Sarah," he gasped, his voice raw with emotion. "I never wanted to involve you. I swear, they threatened you. Everything I did, it was to protect you." The words tumbled out, a torrent of long-held secrets, finally revealing the full extent of his betrayal and the true, horrifying reason for his disappearance. Michael's confession hung heavy in the cold night air, a fragile bridge between the man she had loved and the stranger who had shattered her world. He spoke of the threats, a chilling narrative of how the organization had discovered his true identity, his past life as Julian Thorne, and used it to ensnare him. They had known about Sarah, had watched her, and had made it horrifyingly clear that any deviation from their demands would result in her suffering. His disappearance wasn't an abandonment, but a desperate, flawed attempt to shield her from a darkness he couldn't control. The love he professed, he insisted, had been genuine, overshadowed by a terror that had dictated his every move. Sarah stood frozen, the adrenaline of the chase slowly receding, replaced by a complex storm of emotions. The betrayal still stung, a raw wound, but the new revelation added layers of understanding, if not immediate forgiveness. She saw the fear in his eyes, the genuine remorse etched on his face, and a part of her, the part that had loved him so fiercely, ached for the man trapped within this nightmare. She had to make a difficult choice, one that would define her path forward. Could she help him escape, knowing the danger it posed to her? Or would she turn him over to the authorities, closing the door on any possibility of redemption, however faint? A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, forcing a decision. Michael looked at her, his gaze pleading, expectant. "I have proof, Sarah," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They made me keep records. Everything. If we can get it, we can bring them down." In that moment, a flicker of the old Michael, the one who fought for justice, however misguided, reappeared. Sarah saw not just a victim, but a man willing to atone, to fight back. Her heart, though bruised, recognized the plea for help, the desperate desire for a chance at redemption. Together they made a desperate dash through the labyrinthine service tunnels beneath the auction house, Michael guiding her with an unnerving familiarity. He led her to a hidden compartment in a disused boiler room where he retrieved a heavily encrypted data chip. "This is everything," he said, handing it to her, his hand trembling. "Their network, their contacts, their shipments. It's all here." The sirens were closer now, the shouts of the enforcers echoing through the tunnels. There was no time for elaborate plans, only instinct. They emerged into a bustling street, disappearing into the anonymity of the city night, leaving the chaos of the auction house behind. Sarah knew what she had to do. With the data chip in hand, she contacted the authorities, not as a victim, but as an informant, her voice steady, determined. She laid out the intricate web of deceit, the criminal organization, and Michael's role, presenting the undeniable evidence he had provided. The information was irrefutable, leading to a massive, coordinated raid that dismantled the ruthless network, exposing their illicit dealings to the world. In the aftermath, the organization was shattered. its leaders apprehended, its stolen artifacts recovered. But justice, Sarah knew, was rarely simple. Michael, despite his forced involvement and his ultimate cooperation, still faced consequences for his past actions. He was arrested, charged, and eventually sentenced to a significant term in prison. The bittersweet taste of this resolution lingered. He had saved her, in his own flawed way, and together they had brought down a criminal empire. Yet their story could not have a conventional happy ending. Sarah, though scarred by the betrayal, found strength in her journey. The betrayal map had led her through a landscape of deceit and danger, but it had also forged within her an unyielding resilience. She had confronted her deepest fears, navigated a world of shadows, and emerged stronger, wiser, and irrevocably changed. She visited Michael in prison, their conversations often quiet, filled with unspoken regrets and a fragile understanding. There was no grand declaration of renewed love, no promise of a future together, but a subtle hint of hope for his eventual redemption. A quiet acknowledgement of the complex bond that still existed between them. The map, she realized, had not just exposed a criminal enterprise, it had revealed the depths of her own courage and the enduring power of the human spirit to heal, to forgive, and to find a path forward, even amidst the ruins of a shattered dream.